These accusations in this Sunday Times piece, basically, I mean, in summary, the government basically were behind at other times. They missed early warning signs. The government failed to prepare. They were nonchalant. The Prime Minister didn't chair Cobra meetings. They didn't order enough PPE. And basically, we could have saved a lot more lives if we had a government that had prepared more. Do you agree with that?
Well, they seem very serious allegations. They clearly need to be looked into. I don't know, Julia, the veracity of them, but we have seen over the last 2-3 weeks real crisis in protective equipment for our NHS and care staff. We've seen the testing levels that were promised not yet met. We've seen an absolute disaster in our care homes, and we're still not really on target, as far as I'm told, for sufficient ventilators. And this article particularly talks about the lockdown being late. So there are a series of things here, and I think because the allegations in Sunday Times are pretty serious, they do need to be dealt with. So we have public confidence, which is the key thing. Yes, there may have been mistakes made, and sometimes you can forgive some mistakes. We've all got to work together to solve this thing. But some of these are pretty serious allegations.
Okay, Dan Hodges, although actually you come very much from a sort of a left-wing background, you were a long time a Labour member, you've certainly on social media and in your columns for the Mail on Sunday have been fairly supportive of the government stance so far. What do you make of the allegations and how much blame, if at all, the government should have?
Well, I mean, I agree with Ed that there are obviously issues within the Sunday Times article that are going to need to be addressed, and particularly when, obviously, the crisis is over. But, I mean, you said I've been supportive of the government. I mean, the reason why I've been supportive of the government is it is quite clear to me, and it's been quite clear reading, you can read any of the articles that have examined how the government responded at the start of this crisis. A number of very good articles have been published now. Or just from my own sort of knowledge of speaking to people, across government. The one key thing is that it is clear that from the outset of this crisis, Boris Johnson took the decision very early on that he would be guided almost exclusively by the science and his scientific and medical experts in formulating the government strategy. And if you read the Sunday Times piece, there are sort of issues that need to be addressed, as I said, but it is quite clear, even within the Sunday Times piece, that throughout this process, that is Boris Johnson and his ministers have been doing. They've been following the medical advice. Now, when this is over, we can all have an investigation and a huge debate about whether the advice and the strategy were the best advice and strategy, and I'm sure lessons will be learned. But for the life of me, I cannot see how Boris or, if Ed was back in government or any minister from any political party could, in the midst of a international health emergency, have turned around at the beginning and said to their advisors and said to the country, look, my advisors are telling me one thing, but I'm going to completely ignore them and I'm going to do something completely different. I don't see how that would have been politically sustainable, and crucially, I think that would have been absolutely terrible crisis management.
So, Ed Davey, this is the issue, isn't it? It's very easy, not just with hindsight, but it's very easy for anyone in opposition or any of us sitting in our armchairs to say, "Oh, well, you should do this, you should do that," and say you could cut every single possible life lost if we went into lockdown. I don't know, on January the 3rd, with the first day that we know that Matt Hancock had heard that there was an issue in Wuhan long before the World Health Organization announced anything. The reality is, governments do have to make political choices, don't they? They have to balance risk on one side but risk on the other side. And the advice in terms of the lockdown in particular was from the scientists, we're not going to lock down now, we're going to lock down at the right time, because you can only do it once properly, and you have to, there are various reasons why you have to allow a certain amount of the virus to spread before you go into the lockdown. Is there a worry that we are going to be expecting governments not only to get things perfect, get things right all the time, but to act in a way that is so risk averse in one area that we actually cause a lot more harm in another area? So an earlier lockdown, for instance, may have caused far more damage to the economy and far more damage to people's health in the long term.
Well, clearly we're going to have to look at that, and Liberal Democrats have been pretty supportive up until relatively recently, because, like Dan, we were told by the Prime Minister that they were being guided by the experts, and And that was a welcome, refreshing approach, because often they haven't been. So clearly we were going to support them if they were guided by the experts and the scientists. But there is some evidence emerging. Again, it needs to be looked at carefully. I don't know its veracity. But there's some scientists who are saying they were telling government in early March that they needed to continue with community testing to enable the tracing, and that lockdown could and should have come earlier. So I don't know who's right and wrong and who said what to. Of course I don't. But there are scientists saying they were very surprised when the government ended community testing, I think it was on the 12th or 13th of March, and that they weren't going for an early lockdown. And they are pointing to other countries, like Germany in particular, who took a slightly different strategy and appear to be more successful. Now, this isn't about pointing fingers and playing a blame game, but we do need to learn the lessons. And if ministers didn't follow the advice that they said they were following, that is also a legitimate question to ask.
Okay. Dan Hodges, I mean, again, the testing issue, that's an ongoing issue, and PPE. But of course, I've said every epidemiologist I've spoken to in Germany, we've had a few on the show, has said they expect their death toll eventually to be pretty much the same death toll, the same rate as in every other country. That seems to be what so many experts are saying. And the key thing to remember here, isn't it? Of course, when we say follow the science, there isn't the science. There's a reason why different countries are doing different things. It's because they are following different scientific advice.
Yes, I mean, but I think it's important to. I just need to come back on what Ed said. I mean, as this develops, we will find that there will have been dissenting voices. There will have been people who will have had a different perspective on how the government should have responded, because within science and within medicine, there are obviously differing viewpoints. But the reality is the government has its formal expert panel. The decision-making processes of that expert panel are public knowledge. You can go on the internet and see the rationale. You can see their rationale for things such as Cheltenham that were being discussed earlier. And the issue is not what some scientists said. The issue is what the most senior scientists said, and the most senior medical advisors said, and those who have been duly appointed to advise government. And I made this point on Twitter. Let's reverse the situation. Let's imagine if Boris Johnson had stood up and announced weeks ago that he was going to put the country into the most draconian lockdown, almost virtually a police state, as you said, trashing the economy, confining us all to our homes. If he'd have stood up at a press conference and announced that, the very first question he would have been asked is, well, do your experts support you in this? What would the reaction have been if he'd have to stand up there and said no? This is not the view of my experts. The experts take a different view. The CMO doesn't support this. He thinks it's premature. The CSA doesn't support it. He thinks it's premature. SAGE, my advisory body, think it's premature. NerveTag, the advisory body that feeds into them, think this is premature. But I'm going to do it anyway. What would the reaction? What would your reaction be? What would my reaction be? What would Ed's reaction have been?
Okay, well, Ed, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that very briefly, Wood. So, Ed Davey, what would your reaction have been?
Well, I think we've been quite critical. That's certainly not what I'm saying. And to take on Dan's point that led to that question, there's no doubt there would have been different views on the scientists, and ultimately those in control have to listen to those senior scientists who are charged with that. But that debate and the liveliness of that debate and the different evidence needs to be considered and needs to be looked at when this is all sort of audited and reviewed. I've been struck, however, though, by the fact that quite a few scientists, including some of the ones who were from the group of people in Imperial College, for example, who were very, very surprised and shocked when community testing in early March got rid of. And that is what Germany kept doing. So you might be right, Julia. It might be that although Germany currently has far fewer deaths than we have...
Well, no, I don't ever claim to be an expert on this. I'm just saying all the epidemiologists we've spoken to from Germany have said that.
You said that, and I was just coming back to it because it was different from what I said. All I'm saying at the moment, Germany is quite way behind us, and they took an approach on community testing in early March, which some of the scientists involved in these decisions were saying we should continue with.
Yeah.
And I don't know I don't know why that conclusion was made to get rid of community testing at that point.
All right, we are going to have to leave it there. I'm so sorry to curtail you, but Sir Ed Davey, acting leader of the Liberal Democrats, and Dan Hodges, columnist for the Mail on Sunday. Thank you very much for debating that. Let my very sensible Talk Radio listener decide who they think is in the right on all of that.